My name is Madison Hayes, and I never thought that my brother's wedding day would become the most humiliating moment of my entire life. Weddings are supposed to be about family, love, unity, but for me, it was a brutal reminder that no matter how much I sacrificed for my family, I was nothing more than an afterthought to them. That morning, I woke up early, dressed carefully in a pale blue gown I had chosen weeks ago. I wanted to look elegant but not draw too much attention. After all, it was Daniel's big day, not mine. Daniel Hayes, my older brother, the golden child of the family. Everything had always been about him. Every resource, every ounce of attention, every opportunity had been directed his way, while I was left in the shadows, expected to be silent and supportive. Still, I believed that at least on this one day, I would be treated with a little respect. I had been there through every stage of the wedding planning, helping our parents, even contributing financially when they fell short on deposits. I told myself, surely, they'll remember what I've done. Surely, today I'll feel like part of the family, not just the background character in their story. But the truth hit me the moment I walked into the reception hall. The venue was breathtaking, chandeliers glittering overhead, crystal glasses catching the light, tables draped in white silk. Every guest seemed to shine in their best attire, laughter filling the air. I scanned the room, expecting to see a place card with my name near the front, close to the family table. Instead, I saw my parents sitting proudly beside Daniel and his bride, Vanessa. My aunts and uncles were nearby, smiling and chatting. My cousins had been given prime spots as well. But me? My name wasn't on any of those tables. I asked one of the staff members if there had been some mistake. She glanced at her list, then led me, not toward the center of the room, not even to the far edge, but through a side door into the kitchen area. There, squeezed against the wall beside racks of dishes and the constant clatter of trays, was a tiny round table. A single place card rested on top, Madison Hayes. I froze. My chest burned with humiliation. The smell of grease and steam filled the air as servers rushed past me, balancing plates. From the main hall, I could hear the band starting up and the clinking of champagne glasses. And here I was, hidden away, like an unwanted guest. I wanted to believe it was an oversight, a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. This was deliberate. Vanessa, my new sister-in-law, had always despised me. She saw me as a threat, though I never understood why. I had never tried to steal the spotlight. I had only ever worked to support Daniel, even when he didn't deserve it. But Vanessa had whispered poison into my parents' ears, painting me as bitter, jealous, a burden. And my parents, they believed her. Or maybe they simply didn't care enough to defend me. I sat there at that little table, clutching the edge of the napkin so tightly my fingers hurt. Guests came and went from the kitchen, some giving me awkward looks when they realized I wasn't staff but a family member. My cheeks burned with shame. As the night dragged on, I could hear the toasts from the main hall. Daniel's friends joked about his charm, Vanessa's family praised her beauty, and my father gave a speech about how proud he was of his son. Not once did he mention me. Not once did anyone acknowledge that I was the one who had kept our family's company afloat when things nearly collapsed. That I had wiped sleepless nights while Daniel was out partying. That I had sacrificed my own dreams so that he could chase his. And now, I wasn't even worthy of a seat at the table. It was in that moment, sitting in the kitchen while the celebration roared just beyond the wall, that something inside me snapped. For years, I had endured their favoritism, their neglect, their constant dismissal of my worth. I had told myself that one day they would see me, recognize me, respect me. But that night, I realized the truth. They never would. Unless I forced them to. I left before the cake was cut, slipping out quietly so no one would notice. My car ride home was silent, except for the pounding of my heart. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I went straight to the safe in my closet, pulled out a thick envelope, and stared at the contract inside. It was the contract I had signed years ago, the one no one in my family remembered existed. a contract that gave me more power than they could ever imagine. As I held it in my hands, I whispered to myself, they wanted to seat me in the kitchen like a servant. Fine. But tomorrow, they'll remember who really built this empire. And I'll make sure they never forget again. The morning after Daniel's wedding, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heaviness in my chest. I had barely slept. All night, I kept replaying the scene in my mind, the chandeliers, the laughter, the clinking glasses, and me, shoved into a corner of the kitchen like I didn't belong to my own family. My phone buzzed with dozens of photos on social media, smiling faces of Daniel and Vanessa, the dance floor alive, my parents glowing with pride. In none of those pictures was I visible. It was as though I hadn't even attended. And maybe that's exactly what they wanted. By noon, I finally forced myself out of bed. I brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared at the thick envelope I had pulled from my safe the night before. It had been years since I had touched it, but now it felt like a lifeline. I opened it slowly, my fingers brushing across the crisp legal papers inside. The bold title at the top of the first page brought a bitter smile to my lips. Hayes Construction and Development Equity Agreement, 2018. That year, the company had been on the verge of collapse. My father, Richard Hayes, had made reckless investments. Daniel was too busy enjoying his wild lifestyle to care about numbers. Suppliers weren't being paid, employees were threatening to strike, and bankruptcy loomed. It was me, always me, who stepped in. I had taken out personal loans, poured in my savings, and negotiated deals that pulled us back from the edge. But I hadn't done it blindly. I wasn't naive. I made sure there was paperwork that secured my role. This contract gave me a controlling share in the company if certain conditions were met. Conditions that had quietly been triggered years ago when Daniel failed to fulfill his executive duties. Nobody in my family had noticed, because nobody had cared to read the fine print. They assumed I was just the obedient daughter who would clean up their mess and then fade back into the background. But the truth was, I had been holding the company's beating heart in my hands for years. I traced the ink with my finger, feeling power surge through me for the first time in ages. My humiliation at the wedding had ignited something dangerous inside me, and now, this contract was the weapon I would use. Still, anger alone wasn't enough. If I wanted to make my move, I needed allies, and I knew exactly who to call. I dialed Sam Parker, our family's longtime legal advisor, though in recent years, he had become more my lawyer than anyone else's. Sam was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed, with a patience that came only from years of navigating corporate sharks. He answered on the second ring. Madison, I didn't expect to hear from you so soon after the wedding. How was it? There was a pause on my end. He must have sensed the crack in my voice because his tone softened immediately. Bad, he asked. Worse than bad, I whispered. They sat me in the kitchen, Sam. The kitchen. Like I wasn't even family. I heard him exhale slowly. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. I pressed my fingers against the contract in front of me. No. But maybe it's time I stop waiting for them to see my worth. Maybe it's time I show them. There was silence. Then Sam said carefully, Are you talking about the agreement? Yes, I said firmly. It's time. By evening, Sam was at my apartment. We sat across from each other at my dining table as he reviewed the documents. He adjusted his glasses, scanning every clause with the precision of a surgeon. It's airtight, he finally said, looking up at me. Your father signed it. Daniel signed it. As of the last fiscal year, Daniel officially failed to meet the requirements for his stake. That means the controlling shares are yours. If you want to exercise this, Madison, you'll have majority authority. The words hit me like a jolt. Majority authority. After years of being ignored, sidelined, treated like nothing, I had the legal right to take control. A storm of emotions whirled inside me. Anger, vindication, fear. Could I really do this? Could I stand against my own family and claim what was rightfully mine? Sam seemed to read my hesitation. Listen, Madison. You've been running that company from the shadows for years. Your father and brother might have the titles, but you've done the work. You've saved them more times than they even realize. If you don't step up now, they'll keep walking all over you. And next time, it won't just be a wedding humiliation. It'll be your entire life. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. He was right. I couldn't let them continue to erase me. Okay, I said. We do this, but not recklessly. If I go in guns blazing, they'll turn everyone against me. I want to be strategic. I want them to feel the ground shift under their feet before they even realize what's happening. A faint smile tugged at Sam's lips. Now that sounds like the Madison I know. For the next few hours, we mapped out a plan. Step 1. Quietly assert my authority within the company, making small but significant changes that would draw loyal employees to my side. Step 2. Secure our partnerships with outside investors so that when the truth came out, the business world would stand behind me, not them. Step 3. Confront my family when the moment was perfect, not in private, but in front of everyone who mattered. As midnight approached, I sat back in my chair, exhausted but alive with determination. The contract lay on the table between us, no longer just a piece of paper but a symbol of everything I had endured, everything I was about to claim. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. But little did I know, my family's betrayal ran deeper than I imagined. And as I prepared to rise, they were already plotting to push me down further. The Monday after Daniel's wedding, I walked into the Hayes Construction headquarters not as the invisible daughter, not as the overlooked sibling, but as the quiet owner who finally understood the weight of her power. From the outside, nothing had changed. The tall glass building glimmered in the morning sun. Employees bustled in and out with coffee cups and files, and Daniel's sports car sat proudly in the executive parking spot. But inside me, everything was different. I wasn't here to be seen. Not yet. I was here to start the silent storm. As I stepped through the lobby, I caught glimpses of employees whispering. They knew me, of course. I'd been around for years, helping in the background, staying late when Daniel had already left for parties. But to them, I wasn't the boss. I was just Madison, the sister who worked hard but never got the credit. That narrative was about to change. I made my way to the 14th floor, operations. It was the heartbeat of the company, the place where decisions actually shaped projects and profit. That's where I found Emily Carter, the head of marketing. Emily was sharp, efficient, and one of the few people in the company who had ever respected me. She looked surprised to see me in her office that early. Madison, didn't expect you today. Recovering from the wedding, I assume. Her voice had sympathy, but her eyes carried curiosity. She had heard, no doubt, where I'd been seated. I smiled faintly. Let's just say the wedding gave me perspective. Emily, I need to know something. If you had the chance to ruline our campaigns, would you? Her brows shot up. Ruline? Honestly, yes. The Caldwell deal has us bleeding resources. But your brother insists it's the future. Of course, he did. Daniel always believed flashier meant better. Never mind the actual numbers. I lowered my voice. What if I told you, you could start shifting strategy now? Quietly. Redirect resources where they'll actually matter. Emily leaned back in her chair, studying me. Madison, you sound like you have authority to make that call. I held her gaze. I do. The words hung between us, heavy and certain. By noon, I had spoken with 3 department heads, operations, HR, and finance. Each conversation followed the same rhythm. Skepticism, curiosity, then a slow recognition that I wasn't just speaking as Daniel's sister anymore. I was speaking as someone with control. The contract was my shield, my sword, but I didn't wave it around yet. Instead, I let my decision speak. That week, small but seismic shifts began. Vendor contracts that had been draining us were quietly cancelled. Payroll irregularities that Daniel ignored were corrected. New project proposals, long buried under his flasher deals, was suddenly revived. The employees noticed. Whispers turned into quiet loyalty. Daniel, however, remained oblivious. He strolled through the halls with his usual arrogance, throwing charming smiles at interns, bragging about his honeymoon plans with Vanessa. At meetings, he would drone on about grand visions, not realizing that the ground beneath his feet was already shifting. My father, Richard Hayes, was no better. He spent most of his time in the executive lounge, networking with old friends, convinced that his legacy was unshakable. To him, I was still the daughter who fetched reports, not the woman restructuring his empire from within. But Sam reminded me daily, patience, Madison. Let them laugh while they can. The moment will come when they'll choke on their arrogance. One evening, as I sat reviewing files in my office, Emily knocked on the door. "You need to see this," she said, placing a folder on my desk. Inside were emails between Daniel and the Caldwell family. He wasn't just planning risky partnerships, he was offering them insider access to our financials. In exchange, they promised him a personal stake once the merger went through. It was betrayal in black and white. My brother wasn't just incompetent, he was selling us out. A cold fire spread through me. For years, I had tolerated neglect, favoritism, even humiliation. But this was treason. I looked at Emily, my voice steady but laced with steel. "Thank you. This stays between us for now. But it won't be forgotten." She nodded, her eyes gleaming with something I recognized. Trust. That night, I met with Sam again. We sat in his office downtown, the city lights glowing beyond the window. I slid the emails across his desk. He read them carefully, then looked up at me. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "If these emails go public, Daniel's credibility is finished. But more importantly, it gives you the perfect opening." I leaned forward. "Not yet. I want him to think he's untouchable a little longer. When I pull the rug, I want it to be in front of everyone." Sam's lips curved into a slow smile. "You're not just taking control, Madison. You're preparing a reckoning." Over the next weeks, I continued my silent takeover. I nurtured loyalty in the shadows, built alliances, and waited. Every step I took tightened the net around Daniel and my father. And though they laughed and celebrated, though Vanessa flaunted her new status as Daniel's wife, I knew the truth. Their empire was no longer theirs. It was mine. And soon, the world would know it too. The day of reckoning arrived on a Thursday morning. From the moment I woke up, I felt it, that quiet storm in the air, the kind you sense before thunder splits the sky. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, determined, and strangely dangerous. Gone was the woman they seated in the kitchen at the wedding. Standing in her place was the woman who was about to tear down an empire, or save it. At 8:45 a.m., I entered the glass-walled boardroom of Hayes Construction. The air was thick with tension even before the meeting began. The long oak table gleamed under the lights, leather chairs lined perfectly around it, and at the head sat my father, Richard Hayes, dignified yet visibly tired. His illness had aged him, though he tried to mask it with his suit and presence. Beside him, of course, was Daniel, radiating false confidence, Vanessa at his side like a queen on display. And just as I had expected, Richard Caldwell himself was there, his smug smile already promising trouble. I held my files close to my chest as I walked to the opposite end of the table. Sam Torres was already there, a silent pillar of support. Emily Carter and a few other executives I had quietly brought into my confidence filled the remaining seats. "Let's get started," my father said, his voice rougher than usual. "We have important business to finalize." Daniel leaned forward, grinning. "Yes, let's. Richard, perhaps you'd like to present the merger proposal." Caldwell cleared his throat, standing as though he owned the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, this partnership marks the dawn of a new era. Hayes Construction, under Daniel's leadership, will merge seamlessly with Caldwell Properties. Together, we will dominate the luxury development market. contracts have already been drafted. Stop. My voice sliced through the room like a blade. All eyes turned to me. I stood tall, sliding a thick folder onto the table. Before you go any further, there are irregularities this board needs to see. Daniel laughed. Irregularities? Madison, please. This is business, not one of your accounting lectures. Accounting, I said evenly, is exactly the business we're in. And as CFO, I'm bringing evidence this board cannot ignore. I opened the folder and began distributing copies, financial records, bank transfers, and most damning of all, the emails Emily had uncovered. The room fell silent except for the rustle of paper. One by one, faces around the table shifted. Confusion, then disbelief, then outrage. Over the past 18 months, I began, my voice steady, Daniel has diverted over $2 million from Hayes Construction's accounts into Caldwell projects. Without board approval. Without proper disclosure. That, by definition, is financial misconduct. Murmurs erupted. My father's face paled. That's a lie. Daniel barked, slamming his hand on the table. Those were strategic investments. Dad approved them. I turned to my father. Did you? Richard Hayes swallowed hard, his gaze flickering between me and Daniel. I trusted my son's judgment. Trusted judgment, I said coldly, doesn't excuse betrayal. I pulled out the second set of documents. And here, I continued, our emails between Daniel and Richard Caldwell. In these, my brother offered insider access to our financials in exchange for a personal stake after the merger. He wasn't protecting this company. He was selling it. Gasps filled the boardroom. Vanessa's face drained of color, her carefully composed expression cracking. Daniel, she whispered, tell me this isn't true. Daniel's confidence faltered, but only for a moment. He straightened, his jaw tight. This is business. This is how deals are made. Madison doesn't understand the bigger picture. I leaned forward, my voice like steel. The bigger picture is this. You tried to erase me. You tried to erase our company's integrity. But you forgot one thing. I pulled out the final document, the contract termination letter I had prepared weeks ago. Section 17, subsection C. This agreement with Caldwell Properties may be terminated by the CFO in the event of corporate restructuring or merger activity. My signature is all it takes. And then I placed the signed letter on the table. The room exploded. No. Daniel shouted, lunging toward me, but Sam stood between us. You can't do this. You don't have the authority. She does, Patricia Winters, our lawyer, said firmly from her seat. Her voice cut through the chaos. Legally, Ms. Hayes executed her right within the contract. The termination is valid and binding. Caldwell's face turned crimson. He shot to his feet, waving the letter. This is outrageous. Do you realize what you've done? I will bury this company. Your father promised me. My father, I interrupted, turning my gaze on Richard, may have been willing to gamble away our legacy, but I am not. Silence fell. For the first time, my father looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing the woman I had become. His eyes glistened with shame. The kitchen, he whispered hoarsely. At the wedding. Was that true? Yes, I said, meeting his gaze. They seated me with the staff. Daniel knew. And he did nothing. The weight of those words hung heavy in the room. My father's face hardened, his age and illness momentarily forgotten. He turned to Daniel, his voice trembling with fury. You let your sister be humiliated. You betrayed her, and this company. Daniel stammered, his mask cracking. Dad, it wasn't my decision. Vanessa. Don't you dare blame me. Vanessa snapped, shoving back her chair. You said your sister was nothing. You promised me she wouldn't be a problem. And now look at you. Caldwell tried one last time, his voice oily with desperation. Thomas, be reasonable. We had an agreement. No, my father said, his voice steadier now. We had a mistake, and it ends here. He turned to the board. I move that we accept my daughter's termination of the Caldwell contract, effective immediately, and I move we open an investigation into all financial irregularities. Eleanor Wright, our senior board member, nodded sharply. I second the motion. All in favor? One by one, hands rose around the table. Unanimous, except Daniel, who sat frozen, his hand trembling, unable to vote. This isn't over. Caldwell spat as security entered the room. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I do, I replied, my voice calm. And you'll be too busy explaining to your investors why your showcase collapsed without a construction partner. Vanessa turned on Daniel, her voice dripping with disgust. Don't come home tonight. Or ever. I married a Hayes executive, not a disgraced nobody. And with that, she stormed out with Caldwell trailing behind her, shouting threats no one cared to hear. Silence returned to the boardroom. Slowly, my father rose from his chair and walked toward me. For the first time in my life, he wrapped his arms around me. I'm sorry, Madison, he whispered, his voice breaking. I was wrong. About everything. I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle. Around us, the empire shifted, balance restored, respect reclaimed. The showdown was over. But my story, my reign, was only beginning. The boardroom showdown had ended, but the echoes of that day carried far beyond the walls of Hayes Construction. By the next morning, every business paper in the city had Madison Hayes' name splashed across their front page. The CFO who crushed a merger, Betrayal at Hayes Construction, sister exposes brother, a new leader emerges. For years, Madison had been invisible, the overlooked daughter, the silent worker, the girl seated in the kitchen. Now, she was the woman the entire industry could no longer ignore. The fall of Daniel and Vanessa. Daniel Hayes tried to fight back. He gave interviews on smaller channels, blaming miscommunication, claiming his sister had exaggerated the evidence. But the documents Madison presented were too ironclad. The emails, the bank transfers, the witness statements, all stacked against him. By the end of the week, Daniel's accounts were frozen pending investigation. The luxury condo project he promised Caldwell was halted mid-construction. Investors pulled out. His reputation collapsed overnight. Vanessa was nowhere to be found beside him. Madison learned through quiet whispers that Vanessa had emptied their joint accounts and left the city. She had married into power, not disgrace. When that power crumbled, so did her loyalty. Daniel, once the golden son, was left with nothing but shame and a stack of subpoenas. Richard and Eleanor Hayes, parents in reflection. Their parents, Richard and Eleanor, faced their own reckoning. Richard, weakened by illness, no longer had the strength to control the company. He watched as his daughter, the one he had overlooked for so long, stepped into the role he had denied her. One evening, as Madison walked him to his car, Richard stopped and took her hand. His grip was fragile, yet his eyes burned with regret. I should have seen you, Madison, he whispered. I let my pride blind me. Daniel was never the leader I thought he was. It was always you. She looked at him, searching his face. Once, those words would have melted her, but now, they felt too late. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad, she said gently but firmly. What I need is for you to let me lead without interference. For the first time, Richard Hayes nodded not as a father, but as a man surrendering authority to the rightful heir. Eleanor, however, struggled more. She had been the silent accomplice, the mother who smiled through every slight against Madison. Seeing her daughter command the respect of powerful men and women unsettled her. At a family dinner weeks later, she tried to bridge the distance. I didn't know, Madison. I never realized how much you carried. Madison's response was quiet, almost tender, but final. You never asked, Mom. The rise of Madison Hayes. With the Caldwell contract terminated and Daniel stripped of authority, Madison was formally appointed CEO of Hayes Construction. Her first moves were bold and surgical. She tightened compliance measures. She replaced corrupt department heads with young, ambitious talent. She reached out to communities, restoring the company's tarnished reputation. Under her, Hayes Construction was no longer a playground for entitled heirs. It was a fortress of accountability. The industry buzzed with her name. Investors called. Banks offered favorable terms. Even rivals grudgingly admitted she was a force to be reckoned with. One headline summed it up best. From kitchen seat to boardroom throne, Madison Hayes redefines power. Daniel's last attempt. But Daniel wasn't finished. One late night, as Madison left the office, she found him waiting in the parking lot. His once polished suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his confidence shattered. "You think you've won," he hissed. "You think you can erase me from this family? From this company?" Madison didn't flinch. "I didn't erase you, Daniel. You did that yourself." His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this. I'll find a way back." She stepped closer, her voice low but lethal. "The only way you'll get back in is if you rebuild yourself from the ground up. Without lies. Without betrayal. Until then, stay out of my way." For a moment, Daniel looked as though he might lash out. But then his shoulders slumped, and he walked away, smaller than she'd ever seen him. It was the last time Madison saw her brother as a man of power. Cold justice. Justice didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, in cold, inevitable waves. Caldwell filed lawsuits, but every court dismissed them. Daniel was indicted for financial misconduct. Vanessa's name became synonymous with opportunism in society circles. And Madison, she didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply worked, built, led. That was her justice, not revenge, but triumph. Not destruction, but creation. A new dawn. Months later, Madison stood on the rooftop of Hayes Tower, overlooking the city skyline as the sun painted gold across the horizon. Beside her stood Sam Torres, her loyal lawyer and friend, who had believed in her when no one else did. "You did it," Sam said softly. "They tried to bury you, but they forgot you were the foundation." Madison smiled, a rare softness in her eyes. "This is just the beginning." As the wind swept her hair, her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Westfield Development requests a meeting. The rival empire was making its move. Madison slipped the phone back into her pocket, her eyes narrowing at the horizon. The war was over, but the game had just begun.